Hey everybody, greetings from the Mirror Zone. My name is Bryce Skidmore.
And I'm David Leskin.
And we're here to talk to you about some science fiction that you may not have read or that you may not know exists, but it's fucking awesome. So we're here to talk about it with you.
Yes, and we're going to throw you through the looking glass head first, shards and all.
Now, it's really important to us that when you think about this, you really think about how science fiction relates to your life. And I have to say, this has just been a self-help class for me. The stories we read for this.
Yeah, no, I definitely know where you're coming from. It's like chicken soup for the Omalas type of situation where, a lot of lessons were learned. Everybody went home feeling greater, and
except for the ones who didn't.
Except for the ones who didn't. Yeah, and those are the ones that we're really here to talk about.
No,
the ones who didn't.
We are. And speaking about people who aren't going home, I think that maybe we can jump into our first story. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to give you a plot synopsis, and then we're going to roll through with some quotations. And, we're just going to talk about the works and some other things that you might find interesting that are related to them. Our first piece that we're working with today is by Ray Bradbury. It's called Dark They Were and Golden-Eyed.
Yes, and just to be clear, this is not an Ian Fleming novel, so it's not Dark They Were and Golden-Eye.
No.
The fantastic sequel in the series, one of my favorites.
Tina Turner just sang it in my head. Dark They Were and Golden-Eye.
Yeah, casting's still out on that one.
We tried to reach Tina, she didn't get back to us. It's a real shame.
Yeah.
So, David, would you like to give a plot synopsis, or would you like me to do it?
Let me go into it. We'll jump right in. This is the deep end, and I'm jumping into it. So, Dark They Were and Golden-Eyed, the short story by Ray Bradbury. It's all about what one might consider to be the typical American family in the not too distant future, maybe the far distant future. We're not really given complete clues as to where it is.
Well, there is still a New York.
There is still a New York.
But ask a New Yorker, they think it's going to be there forever.
That's right. And basically what happens is we get to see the trials and tribulations of this family that are escaping Earth and the threats of nuclear war for possible prosperity on the Red Planet. Mm-hmm. And once they get there, we see the family known as the Bitterings and their bitter-sweet progress into becoming naturalized Martians.
Great segue.
Thanks. I was hoping to nail it. And basically what happens in this story is the Bickerings arrive on Mars with archaeologists having already discovered a previous civilization that had inhabited Mars, including villages, tiny ones at least.
So wait, are there Martians there?
There are no Martians. There's none at all. There's civilizations there, but they are all gone. And while the mystery is left there, it's left there tantalizingly. These people are forced to live their lives, and they just sort of have to overlook what happened to these Martians because it's not really threatening them in any way. Mm. But as we soon learn, maybe the Martian way of life is threatening to them insofar as changing their behavior. They begin to grow foods, they begin to breathe in the atmosphere, they begin to sit in the sun, and slowly but surely all the family and the other settlers begin changing, become almost like what they think are the voices of ghosts telling them to become the new Martians. Would you say that's accurate?
No, I would. I definitely would. There's evidence for it in the text, I think. But is everyone chill about this? Are they sort of going with their sort of new digs and really into being Martians, or?
Most of the people go with the flow. They don't really mind the changes that are happening and sort of accept it as the consequence of living on Mars. But our main character, Mr. Bittering, he has a very different reaction to this. He's afraid of the changes. It puts him in a panicky state, so much so that he refuses to eat the food from Mars. He only eats frozen food from Earth. And, he's just afraid of how the planet could change them. And this is his panic and paranoia are further exacerbated by a nuclear war on Earth, showing that there's really no way from going back, and that the changes he's experienced on Mars are permanent as far as they know.
Yeah, so World War terminus, to steal from Philip K. Dick, happens on Earth, and New York City is completely destroyed, and there are no more ships from Earth coming to Mars. And Mr. Bittering is not happy about it.
No, he's so unhappy about it that he, although his complaints fall on deaf ears, decides to try and build his own way home. If he can't wait for the rockets, then he'll build his own. And despite the protestations of the other colonists, some of them start to help him out. Now, as time goes on, the changes become hard to ignore for him and his family, his children taking on the names and language of the Martian ancestors that lived on the planet. And eventually, they all decide to move and become Martians themselves to some degree. They leave their homes, the trappings of their old lives behind. And even Mr. Bittering finally lets the change come. He finally accepts it.
And what's the change look like? Because we hear a lot about change, but it's like there's a physical aspect to this, yeah?
Yes. So, due perhaps to the atmosphere, the eating the food, and the sunlight, their skin and eye colors begin to change. They become darker skinned. Their eyes become golden. They become slimmer. They go through metamorphosis, all of them.
No, and it's like that was one of my absolute favorite bits of this story was just the description of like human bodies like morphing into alien bodies. And was it you brought it up earlier? But it's like, and I just wanted to point out, there's a human settlement on Mars that they start to live in, and you're right where it's like there's all of these other settlements that are Martian and ancient. But by the end of the story, the humans realize that they don't like the human places. They want to live in the old Martian houses. And that's after they start using Martian words for things.
It's sort of it's a cascade effect after that point. Once they've accepted using the Martian words, they begin to become envious of the Martian settlement and realize that the new people that they are find it much more hospitable than their old way of life. And eventually they pick up their belongings and like the settlers of old, they leave and go to the new Martian settlement, or the old Martian settlement.
Yeah. And Mr. Bittering, he's building a rocket to go home, but after he runs out of the food from the deep freeze, he starts eating the Martian food, and like he kind of forgets about his rocket. Like he joins his family in the villa, which I just have to say real quick. There are villas there. Like, why are you living in a shitty house that you made? Like, if you could go live in a sick Martian villa with fountains and pools.
Totally unrealistic. Took me out of the story. Thanks, Bradbury. Hashtag no thanks. No, but I agree with you. It is very interesting for the purposes of the story that they, from scratch, create new settlements to mirror the old ways that they had come from, rather than making use of the settlements and resources that were already there. And I think that is meant to tie into a bigger theme of the changes between the old and the new, appropriation and metamorphosis, as what we've talked about earlier.
Exactly. Yeah. So, before we get into quotes, how does the story end?
The story ends 5 years later, I believe, and a new settlement, not new settlement, I should say, but a new group of people come from Earth. They say the war is over and rockets are ready to come to Mars again. And what they find is an empty settlement, completely abandoned. And all they find are the Martians, a race of people already on the planet, very different, with dark skin and golden eyes.
Very different, but they seem to speak English very well. They pick it up really fast. Quick.
That's right. And we're meant to suppose, almost leading on kind of a cliffhanger, that maybe the cycle has begun again.
No, and that's one of my, I feel like it's incredibly bone-chilling, like the very last bit where they show up and they're like, where are all the people? I mean, there are these Martians, and the guy's like, well, I mean, I guess we can take the settlement, the colonel says, and he turns to his lieutenant, and it's just like, wouldn't you agree? And the dude's just like lost in thought, like he's just staring out over Mars, it's like, what, huh?
Yeah, as though he's been enchanted too.
Yeah, he's being affected too. So yeah, no, excellent, yes. Good plot. Alrighty.
So let's talk a little bit about some of our favorite quotations and passages in this.
Absolutely. Like it says in the Bible, In the beginning there was the Word, so I'm looking at the words because they are the beginning. And there's some pretty good ones. I love the description of the Bitterings once they get to Mars. Was it the children look up at their father as people look up at the sun to tell what time of life it is, which I kind of love that. Where I don't know if you remember, like when you're a kid, just like looking at your parents and just sort of like becoming incredibly aware of just like where exactly you are in the journey of life.
Right, and to imagine that they're doing this while on the surface of another planet, staring at the planet that they came from, you get this extra sense that they're tethered to their father in a way that maybe we can't entirely understand, but that evokes those feelings from our own childhood.
Exactly, yeah.
Colonial days all over again, he declared. Why, in 10 years there'll be 1 million Earthmen on Mars. Big cities, everything. They said we'd fail. Said the Martians would resent our invasion. But did we find any Martians? Not a living soul.
Dude, so much to unpack there. First, I love that they're calling it an invasion. Call it what it is.
Yeah, it's definitely, they came ready for War of the Worlds, and what they ended up was the Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
On Mars.
Or the color from outer space, depending on how you read it.
That's very true. Yeah, not a living soul, or was there?
Yeah. No, it's so great. And it's this is one of those aspects that seems to plague the Martians early on, or like the humans, is that just there are these echoes of like a past civilization that was there before, and one of the Bittering children gets incredibly engrossed in just sort of a fear of these cities. He says to his dad, I get scared, and I see those towns way up in the mountains where the Martians lived a long time ago, and I think I see things moving around in the towns, Papa, and I wonder if those Martians mind us living here. I wonder if they won't do something to us for coming here. Nonsense, Mr. Bittering looked out the window. Nonsense, Mr. Bittering looked out the windows. We're clean, decent people. He looked at his children. All dead cities have some kind of ghosts in them. Memories, I mean. And that's... Whoa.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I think we were talking about this earlier, but the idea that the ghosts of Mars would care about clean, decent people.
Yeah, what the fuck is a good, clean, decent person to a Martian?
Well, and just because the Martians...
You're nice and white, you must be welcome here. What?
Yeah, there's a lot of bead sales going on, I would assume, if the Martians had been there.
Yeah. No, and it's... And I also and it's just one of those things because it just leads from that so crisply into this wonderful line where it's like, all cities have ghosts. And it's like, that's just an experience that you can get from walking down any street in any ruin, just any place where people used to live, where you can kind of gather a feeling that there was once a community there, and your mind starts to fill in the blanks as to what that was. And, the ghosts are memories. And I'm just super interested in that. I love the idea that, because I'm not so sure if I believe in ghosts, as a true entity, but I do believe in, the strength of memory and, the things that can evoke. Even if you've never heard the story of the scary house that you're living in, you could still hear, scary things.
Yeah, regardless of ectoplasm or not, the trauma carries down through the years. And it has a presence there. In the same way, these Martians' lack of presence is that much more maybe disturbing to the colonists and settlers.
No, exactly. No, and I feel like there's too that it's a wonderful fear because it immediately follows, or it is immediately followed by the next World War on Earth. And he freaks out when he finds out, was it the Mrs. Bittering tells her husband, a radio flash just came, atom bombs hit New York, all the space rockets blowing up, no more rockets to Mars ever. And he immediately just flips out, and in this wonderful three sentence line, which there's sentence fragments, he says, no way back, no way, no way. It's prose panic.
It's definitely set in for him finally, because in many ways, with the ability to return to Earth, even if he didn't have the will or the intention, he had that safety line. And once that's severed, he is stuck in this situation, and the ghosts are more familiar to him now, or at least reachable, than is his own planet and his own people.
No, exactly. And I think there's this wonderful thing that happens where, we see the grand evidence of a once flourishing society on Mars, and that is immediately followed by what we can assume is the destruction of Earth. Because it said the thing says no, the communication says no rockets to Mars ever. Like they're completely cut off. So Earth essentially may have become this sort of Martian version. So it's, I can understand someone freaking the fuck out in that situation where it's like, we're living in a dead planet and we came from a dead planet, and maybe if I just build this rocket and only eat food from Earth, everything will just be fine.
Yeah, and that's really all he has left to hold him over at that point for his survival instincts for the old ways and to keep the old traditions going is sort of to do what feels familiar. And even if building a rocket will take 30 years, he can take some solace that way back may still be there, that he may still be able to return. And he clings to it for dear life. And
he seems to be the only one.
He does. I think that even before the changes start setting in, the settlers already seem pretty resigned to life on Mars, and even seem a little removed and distant about the reaction to the war on Earth. Maybe it's shell shock or something like that, but they don't seem that disturbed by it compared to him. He's the sole voice speaking out against this.
No, you're totally right. No, he's the only one freaking out. Everyone else at sort of the general store is just sort of like, whatever. They seem, and I think they're sort of, and I think we were talking about this too, where it's like they've kind of let go of humanity. Maybe not so much super because Mars is affecting them physically so much at this point, as it's just, well, look at where the fuck we came from. We left a planet that was threatening to blow itself up with nukes, and surprise, it blew itself up with nukes.
That's right.
There's sort of a thing where it's maybe they're just kind of resigned to losing Earth because they already decided to leave it.
Yeah, I mean, it's implied a lot in a lot of ways. We don't get told it, but if the sentiments that his wife shares are shared by the rest of the settlement, it seems like they were already ready to leave Earth behind, and the nuclear bomb sort of solidified that in the news, and they weren't really upset by it because they'd already come to terms with that.
Yeah.
In fact, Mr. Bickering is the only one who even wants to go back the entire story, regardless of nuclear war or not.
No, he totally is. I love it. I can't find it right now, but it was one of my favorite little bits of prose. That was just, it's years later, he's kind of lost interest in building the rocket, and it says that, he kind of gets a lot further enlisting the help of 3 uninterested people. He just finally got 3 people to help him with his rocket, and they just don't give a fuck. 3
annoyed people who figured they might get a beer and a pizza out of the whole situation.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it comes to nothing. The rocket sits with rust eventually, and not even after that much time, because this is the red planet, and rust sets in a lot faster.
Now, can I read you some really good Martian landscape porn?
Make it so.
Yeah. The web gone, the rockets lying in jigsaw heaps of molten grinder and unsnaked wire. Earth people left to the strangeness of Mars, the cinnamon dusts and wine airs to be baked like gingerbread shapes in Martian summers, put into harvested storage by Martian winters. What would happen to him, the others? This was the moment Mars had waited for. Now it would eat them.
It's such a great line because you get the sense that even with the threat of looming nuclear war getting them to leave the planet, they weren't really considering their own mortality as much up until that point. Or at least Mr. Bickering wasn't. He seemed to be in denial of the whole thing. And with that solidified, it sinks in. This is where they're staying.
Mm-hmm. This is home now.
This is home now.
This is fucking home now. And I love it too, where it's there's, as apprehensive as he is about Mars, there are always these wonderful descriptions that Bradbury will pepper into it that make it sound just so beautiful. Just a really weird desert paradise where it's just the worst things in the world can happen, and you can keep feeling worse. And it's one of the things that's frightening about it is that Mars will always respond to you with a gentle, beautiful breeze, or with cinnamon dust, or like, you know, just basically just something beautiful. It's like a wonderful place to be, and it's easy to forget that you're stuck there.
It almost sounds comforting to be enveloped in this history and entire planet and be accepted almost entirely, as long as you're willing to change and be the way you should be in the present on Mars. It does sound very beautiful and cozy in kind of a desert paradise.
Yeah.
You know, it's basically the idea of, hey, come to Mars. There's no people. The civilizations left behind look great. And not only that, you know, there's all the food and drink you could ever want. Side effects may include eyes turning gold, losing weight.
Which I'm like, and this is another thing where it's like, I love like metamorphosis in science fiction. It's one of my absolute favorite things. If this is what living on Mars does to you, I want to look like that. That
Sign me up.
Amazing. I want to be dark and golden-eyed.
I know, it does sound pretty sweet, doesn't it? And you know, it's like you're never going to take a bad selfie at that point.
No, it's going to be, and you're just going to be fucking crazy and awesome. Like,
wow, Terry, what happened to you? You look amazing. Went to Mars and forgot I was an Earthman. Pretty sweet. Pretty sweet.
Was it? I kind of want to drop this one. I think that this is a really amazing statement about like human beings and just how we process knowledge. You know, we have to put a name on everything. We enjoy labels. We enjoy being able to point at a thing and know what it is, and because we gave it a name, God damn it, and that's what it is.
Well, that actually ties really well into what was the original title of this story?
Oh God. Okay, it was originally published in Thrilling Wonder Stories in August 1949 under the title "The Naming of Names."
Perfect.
That's beautiful.
It really is, and you know, that's like what we said. That's deeply integral to the themes of the story.
And also, like, I mean, this is one of those things where, like, English nerdy about, but in John Milton's Paradise Lost, this is, and I don't know if this is like a biblical precedent or if it's just something that Milton invented because he thought it was cool. But when God creates man, the first job he gives Adam is go name things. Go name all of the things in my creation. So Adam goes around and he's just like, you're a fucking tulip. You're a sheep.
Well, it's true because many stories in all cultures talk about the idea that naming something gives power. It gives power to the person who knows the name, and it gives power to the person who gives the name.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And with all of that in mind, this is how names work in Bradbury's story. He thought of the proud old Martian names that had once been on those peaks, Earthmen dropping from the sky, had gazed upon hills, rivers, Martian seas, left nameless in spite of names. Once Martians built cities, named cities, climbed mountains, named mountains, sailed seas, named seas, mountains melted, seas drained, cities tumbled. In spite of this, Earthmen had felt silent guilt at putting new names on these ancient hills and valleys. Nevertheless, man lives by symbol and label. The names were given.
It's such a perfect quote for this because you only get half the side of the story with the idea of metamorphosis and change, but there's a level to this of, I don't know, appropriating or transhumanism or cultural identification. It's very deep in the roots of the story.
No, totally. And it's like, what is that? And I love that he feels guilt about renaming Martian shit.
That's right. I mean, where somebody would say this is Nixon Town and these are the Roosevelt Hills. How much?
Oh, do you want to read that bit?
Yeah, we should. Yeah. We should. Now there were Hormel Valleys, Roosevelt Seas, Ford Hills, Vanderbilt Plateaus, Rockefeller Rivers on Mars.
That's the most asinine yet honestly human thing I've heard.
It really is, because I mean, you get to this place and it's like, well, what do we give the names? We got to give them new names, better names, patriotic names.
And it's like, what's weird is like, we're long enough removed from history that I don't mind Roosevelt like getting his name on something for some reason. But the idea of like Hormel chili getting a valley is just like, calm it the fuck down, humans. Like,
yeah. These are the country kitchen valley, and over there is the Cracker Barrel lake. It's a little egregious.
Yeah.
And the main character, Bittering, he recognizes this.
No, and I think that's interesting too, because he's the most reticent to accept the change, but he's also the one to realize that, this sort of renaming it's hiding a past. Like, it's not coming to terms with the present, which I think is really weirdly the point of Mars.
Yeah, it's the whole point of not just why they're there, but even the end result of the story is this idea of giving something a name that's inappropriate or a meaning that's inappropriate rather than meeting it on its own terms.
Yeah.
Which is what they eventually end up doing.
No, exactly. And I just thought too of is it that bit from Fight Club where the narrator is just like, when deep space exploration ramps up, it's going to be the corporations that name everything. Welcome to the Starbucks Nebula.
It's so true. It is deeply ingrained in human nature, and it is very endearing and a little asinine too.
Mm. No, I'm simultaneously repulsed and charmed.
As I think is the narrator as well. Or Mr. Bickering, the main character.
Exactly. But a rose by any other name
is still a Martian.
It's still a Martian. And what's actually interesting is when they manage to grow things on Mars, and this is one of my favorite quotes about it. So they start growing vegetables on Mars, and they start to realize that they kind of taste off. Like there's something different about them. And Mr. Bickering, in just full psychosis mode, just freaks out about it. He says, "Do these look like carrots?" Yes. No. She hesitated. I don't know. They're changed. Perhaps. They have. Onions but not onions. Carrots but not carrots. Taste? The same, but different. Smell? Not like it used to be. He felt his heart pounding and was afraid. He dug his fingers into the earth.
It's very pod people syndrome. The idea that everything that you know has subtly been changed or replaced by something and no one will believe the truth.
No, that was actually, and it's one of my absolute favorite quotes that Stephen King had, is he mentioned something about the difference between horror and terror. And he says, I think it was terror, or horror was, horror is waking up one day and finding out that everything in your home has been replaced by something that looks exactly like it.
It is. It's like an itch you couldn't scratch.
Yeah, no, and it's this thing where it's like, you can't quite explain it, but it's just not a carrot, man. It's not an onion. It's not good, man. It also reminded me of that Rick and Morty episode where they got off on that one planet that they were shopping for new planets to live on. They get off and they're like, "Oh, this place looks nice," and oh look, flowers on a cob. And then Rick just like looks down the minute level. He's like, "Everything's on a cob. Everything's on a cob. Everybody, we have to leave." Like,
for Rick, that is true horror.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it sounds pretty great.
I love it. Strawberries on a cob. That sounds lovely.
Popcorn on a cob. Yeah, I bet you they have that on Mars.
Oh, they must. Was it? I'm not gonna waste too much time on this. I just thought it was adorable. 2 days later, Dan came running. "Come see the cow. I was milking her and I saw it. Come on." They stood in the shed and looked at their one cow. It was growing a third horn.
Super fast mutation.
Wow.
Now I have questions. I have a lot of questions.
So many questions.
Does that mean that there were originally Martian cows and this cow is turning into a Martian cow? Or were there horned Martians and the cow is also turning into a Martian?
Wow. These are questions.
They are questions. For sure they're questions. The basic definition of a question.
Oh, man. Yeah, so,
there were little, very dim flecks of new gold captured in the blue of his eyes. "Now look what you've done," said Sam a moment later. "You've broken my mirror."
Oh, fuck.
It's very sort of, it's Kafka-esque in some ways, the idea of the metamorphosis, and It also evokes the idea of the Joker in Batman 1989, where he sees his reflection and breaks the mirror.
Yeah.
I mean, it encapsulates the true horror of Mr. Pickering's situation.
Yeah, no, it's a complete unacceptance. It's a complete refusal of like the reality that's right in front of him, and it's also completely it's all consuming.
Unlike the rest of the book, which has a lot of really detailed descriptions, we don't need to see completely what he saw in the mirror.
No.
His reaction to it's enough.
No, it's totally enough. It's chilling. And I love it too because the whole thing started off kind of on this premise of, oh, look at these ghost cities, look at all this weird shit, but there's no Martians here. Like I'm afraid of the Martians. I'm afraid. What if the Martians don't like us? Plot twist, you are the Martians. You are the fucking monster. You look in the mirror and you see yourself being different.
Oh, we are the monster. It's one of the scariest horrors I can think of.
It's simultaneously my absolute favorite sci-fi twist and the most overused. The monster was me all along.
Twist, I was a pig face guy.
Plot twist.
I knew you were a pig face guy. We've been talking for the last 10 minutes.
Plot twist, man is the most evil animal.
Man, wasn't there a cookbook that said something about this?
How to Serve Man.
That's the one. By Julia Child.
Oh God, I hope they have books in hell and that's one of them.
I do too. But now you're making me want to go to the Library of Hell.
Apparently they have extra books in Corinthians, Constantine told me. So here's just some more beautiful Martian descriptions. The nights were full of wind that blew down the empty moonlit sea meadows past the little white chest cities lying for their 12,000th year in the shallows. In the Earthman settlement, the Bittering house shook with a feeling of change. And beautiful description, but then that leads us into the line that gives us, or the piece that gives us the title of the story. Mr. Bittering looks at his wife, and he notices, dark she was and golden-eyed, burnt almost black by the sun, sleeping, and the children metallic in their beds, and the wind roaring forlorn and changing through the old peach trees, the violet grass, shaking out green rose petals. Everything's changing.
Yeah, in a way, it's almost like the last vestiges of that part of himself that was keeping him afraid, keeping himself resistant to the change, and sort of as the beauty washes over him and the change washes over him, the finality kind of settles in.
Exactly.
And it's a beautiful finality. Like once he accepts it, he realizes the beauty of all that's around him. And it's nothing to be afraid of at all. It's something to welcome.
No, and in fact, do you want to talk about when he accepts it finally?
Yes. They leaped into the canal water, and he let himself sink down and down to the bottom like a golden statue, and lie there in green silence.
I love that line.
All was water quiet and deep. All was peace. He felt the steady, slow current drift him easily. If I lie here long enough, he thought, the water will work and eat away my flesh, until the bones show like coral. Just my skeleton left. And then the water can build on that skeleton. Green things, deep water things, red things, yellow things. Change. Change. Slow, deep, silent change. And isn't that what it is up there? It's beautiful and terrifying.
It is. It's so beautiful. It's simultaneously like it's not just him I feel like it's not just him accepting that he's changing into a Martian, but it's like also just accepting that you're gonna die.
Yes, that's definitely true. I definitely got an ego death vibe to this idea, the idea of being submerged, of hitting rock bottom, of facing death in the face and then returning. And
then just being like kind of cool with it too, where it's like, just make me coral. Like, just imagine this. And I'm like, imagine just the body sort of breaking down and becoming a part of this new Mars. Like,
yeah, it's beautiful. It's the idea that the remnants that were left behind might not just be the buildings, but maybe the Martians themselves are part of the Earth, part of the Mars now.
Exactly.
And now so is he.
No, and it's beautiful. And that comes right after, and it's one of the things where he's just completely manic for most of the story up until this point. He is obsessed with his goddamn rocket. His family finally talks him into taking a day, and before that happens, it says a few trembling shook him, but were carried off in waves of pleasant heat as he lay in the sun. He was too tired to be afraid.
That's so perfect. The idea that, his wife is telling him, you're obsessed with this all the time. Just take a day and be with your family. And he finally is able to let go of all of that feeling and just enjoy it. But when he does, he lets the full change happen.
Yeah. No, exactly. And it's on kind of a personal level, I love this line, and I will probably carry it with me for a very long time. But I don't know if any of you are like me out there, experience some very strong anxieties that are somewhat irrational, and sometimes you could just freak yourself out over nothing, and you just rip yourself apart from the inside. And then there's this really weird moment that happens after you've done it for a certain amount of time, where you're just tired, and you chill, and the world didn't end.
Yeah, and suddenly a deep, long sleep sounds like the best thing in the world, and really all of the rest of the stuff's not that important anymore.
Exactly. Fucking Bradbury, man. Just teaching you lessons.
Life lessons on every page.
A lesson a page. That's what we sell here, sir. A lesson a page.
Yeah,
Step right up, get your lesson a page.
That was actually a rule in the magazines. It's not just per word, it's also per moral. You have to make sure that you throw this in for the kids.
Are you serious? That's like a thing where they had to...
The lies. Every word that I just said.
I was going to say, that would be amazing where it's like, look, Ray, we like your story, but there's no moral in it for the kids.
You ever seen that movie, Battlefield Earth? That movie's got morals up the wazoo. Why'd you do that?
So many morals. The only moral I happen to take away from it is that you can learn how to operate a 1,000-year-old Harrier jet at the Denver Public Library.
You know what they say, 10,000 hours and 3 things in the rocket brain machine. Indoor, right? It's an indoor thing.
Yeah, I feel like that's a piece of technology that should really hang on. So you have the machine that teaches you everything right away.
Especially jet, but not car driving. That dude can totally fly a jet. Not so much a car.
No.
He didn't need it, though. Didn't need it.
No. As time passes on Mars, the people start to become Martian I'm not going to say in a strange way, in a very straightforward way, they become Martians. But before then, there's these wonderful descriptions of everyone just sort of uproots out of the human settlement and they move into the villas that the Martians built, because lo and behold, it looks like the Martians built them as though they were meant for people to live in on Mars. There's pools and shit. Apparently it's cooler than the human valley. So it's just the perfect place to live. But the description of this summer is amazing to me. Summer burned the canals dry. Summer moved like a flame upon the meadows. In the empty earth settlement, the painted houses flaked and peeled. Rubber tires upon which children had swung in backyards hung suspended like stopped clock pendulums in the blazing air. And, at the metal shop, the rocket frame began to rust. In the quiet autumn, Mr. Bittering stood, very dark now, very golden-eyed, upon the slope above his villa, looking at the valley. "It's time to go back," said Cora, his wife. "Yes, but we're not going," he said quietly. "There's nothing there anymore."
It's a great end to their journey, in a way. I mean, this is probably the last we see of the Bickerings as the Bickerings before we jump forward and they're full-on Martian.
Exactly. Then the narrative sort of telescopes out, and it's no longer about the Bitterings. It's about 5 years later when the humans show up. Was it actually, first real quick, Mr. Bittering gazed at the Earth settlement far away in the low valley. Such odd, ridiculous houses the Earth people built. They didn't know any better, his wife mused. Such ugly people. I'm glad they're gone. They both looked at each other, startled by all they had just finished saying. They laughed.
Yeah, they were able to laugh because they were able to see the truth of what they were saying, even if they weren't sure exactly where it was coming from.
Exactly. No, I fucking love that. It's one of my favorite, just sort of accepting moments, like, which I feel like that's a genre we should talk about, or like, just sort of a trope that we should talk about more, like, at some point. Just like acceptance and self-acceptance is just so interesting to me, and I love it when a writer can find a new way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, what we normally end up with is a lot of the Campbell-esque, like, hero's journey in terms of the change of the character, but, some of these stories about transhumanism and, post-humanism, it's a entirely different take on the hero's journey.
Mm. No, totally. No, it's what was it, in the Shakespearean days, they would, or at least this is what I was taught, was the genre of play that Shakespeare wrote that was sort of focused on this type of idea. It was the romance play. It's a play where no one really dies, no one gets married, but the entire point of it is that someone has to change. Someone has to grow from point A to point B, and that's the point of the narrative. And I feel like this really delivers that, like, in a wonderful way.
It's almost narrative musical chairs.
Exactly.
Or personality musical chairs, whichever way you want to go with it.
Species-wise, it's planetary musical chairs.
That's right. It's Xeno musical chair game on Mars.
Xeno musical chairs on Mars?
Yeah, I saw it outside on my church. They were advertising that game, and I didn't go.
All right, so 5 years later, the humans come back. The captain of this detachment established his headquarters in an abandoned bar. Which, I like that right away. It's like, new planet. That bar looks empty. Let's hang out there. According to, and this is like, this is one of those things. Tell me if I'm reading too much into this, or this might be kind of, like, am I reading too much into this racially, or does this hold water? As soon as the lieutenant comes back to report, he says, "The town's empty, but we found native life in the hills, sir. Dark people, yellow eyes, Martians, very friendly. We talked a bit, not much. They learn English fast. I'm sure our relations will be most friendly with them, sir." And the captain just says, "Dark, eh? How many?"
Yeah, that did stand out for me.
Yeah.
Their priorities were very clearly in an order.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, there was a lot of this book that reminded me of Manifest Destiny, the cattle trains and the Oregon Trail, all that kind of stuff about going west. And in a way, that's what they were doing, but instead of taking over the local people, they became them.
Exactly. No, and there's something fascinating about it that I think is it starts off where we started off on these words that were very strong of like colonial and invasion. The humans that just arrived they did not know there weren't Martians there. They were expecting the Martians to be not very cool with them. But there weren't Martians because they became the Martians. Like, that's the most, like, that's like one of the best, like, sort of, I feel like, counter-colonial things that I've ever seen.
It's definitely post-colonial, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of precedents for it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, some of the other things that reference this idea, but, things like Avatar and other sort of, like, cultural immersion into alien culture. Mm-hmm. With this one being that there wasn't the happy local natives that taught them these things. They became those guys.
Mm-hmm. No, and slowly, gradually, frighteningly.
Yes, over time.
So, was it last quote I want to talk about? And it's just cute, given our whole conversation on names. As soon as the detachment gets to Mars, this is what they say. All the old records were lost. We have a job of remapping to do, renaming the mountains and rivers and such. Calls for a little imagination.
Yeah, step 1, take over local bar. Step 2, rename everything.
Sir, there are Martians. They might have... I said rename everything. Good white people names, too. Or, like, good chili.
Wholesome, decent chili names. That's right. And over there is the Hines Range of mountains. It's beautiful and gorgeous.
The Hines Mountains.
Brought to you by Budweiser.
All right. So, that's our quotations. Do you have anything you want to share with us? Response upon reflection?
Yeah, I mean, it feels, overall, what the story does is it manages to put together two different themes, the idea of fear of the other and the idea of becoming the other. And it does this using a lot of sci-fi horror tropes while managing to subvert a lot of them. And that's what I really like most about the story, is the idea of the fear of the other changing to become acceptance and becoming the other.
Yeah.
And I think that that's some of the best use of science fiction. Is it's not just showing us what could happen in the future in terms of technology, but what could happen to ourselves.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And it reminds me of, there was this, his name is Timothy Morton. He's a professor of English. I think he was at Davis. I don't know where he is now. But he sort of brought up this thing in the lecture I found super interesting where, and I don't think it's his idea alone by a long shot, but the strangest person you know is yourself. Like, that's the person that you could never really get a handle on because you're always looking out through your own eyes. So, like, that's one of the reasons I feel like why body horror is so impactful. Like, when you get this moment where you can, like, look into a mirror and see that you are not you, but everyone else who looks at you knows that you're you. Like, what is you then? Like, that's the subversive horror that you're talking about, where it's like this, and it's gentle. Like, it's not, there's no alien invasion. There's no, like, crazy zombies or, like, things to fight.
Right. It's not like a larval thing or something like The Fly, where it's literal, like, Kafka-esque body horror. It is very gentle, and I think that the most horrifying aspect is the idea of not being in control of what happens to you. And I mean, it's a very deep and base fear, but in a lot of ways, it's not something you can really fight in the same way as maybe zombies or some other type of other physically attacking you. You're not being molested, you're being gently coddled into change.
Yeah. No, and we've spoken about this briefly, but I think it bears bringing up again, is in this reality, like in this story, you have a group of people who are trying to survive on a completely new planet, and as they do that, they notice that they start to change, and there's a reticence, at least in Mr. Bittering, about this, where it's like, no, I'm human, I have to do this, like, I have to be like this. And I couldn't help but think about, like, the wonderful line that the puppeteer has in the anime for The Ghost in the Shell, where the puppet master just tells the woman, like, everything changes in a dynamic state. The desire to remain what you are is what limits you. So, I mean, in that whole transhumanist idea, I think that would just be an amazing advice to give to Mr. Bittering, where it's like, look, dude, you're trying to make life on this new planet happen. You can't just live like a human anymore. You're not on Earth. You have to roll with the punches. You have to be able to take in the environment and let it become a part of you so that you can be a part of it.
Yes, and especially considering some of the quotes that are made in here about Native American traditions, I think it's very fascinating that Mr. Bittering almost goes through kind of a shamanic transformation, if you look at it on that level, on maybe the occultist or spiritual sense, that he literally has to have an ego death experience before he can accept what's happening to him is not horror at all, or at least, whatever he needs to tell himself in order to get past this idea that his way, his being is the only way, and that any sort of change beyond that is negative. And it expresses self-hatred in himself in a way almost. Like, he contradicts himself a lot in the idea of talking about old ways being better than new ways, and I think that plays itself out in the transformation. Which,
I mean, and I love that too. Like, I love that you put it that way, because it's like, I never even considered that, but like, what exactly the mindset of this person is who is just so obsessed with Earth and the way things are done there. Why does that person get on a ship with his family and move to another planet, if not to do something that's not Earth?
Exactly. And I mean, it also begs the question of, like, can you imagine if maybe some of the Martians came back and they're like, wait a minute, are you guys playing Martian? What is all this? No, we're not dead. We're not ghosts calling
We were just on holiday.
And you're living in our houses? This is weird.
Oh, this is awkward. Fucking no one invited the humans. Why would we invite the humans?
Yeah, but no, seriously, I do think that is a good way of looking at it, is once you break down the barriers of the difference between you and the other that you fear, you realize those barriers were imaginary. They were in your own head. And that's, I think, really what we see as his journey, Mr. Bittering, is that he has an internal struggle of dealing with the old and the new, and once that dies, he's able to be comfortable with what he is and where he is.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. It's such a good story.
It is.
So, if you liked this story, there are a few other stories that maybe you should check out that either are accidentally like this story or just straight up ripped from this story.
Quote unquote heavily influenced.
Heavily influenced stories. What's like a really good heavily influenced story that...
I mean, I think we both kind of reached this at the same points in the book, but Ghosts of Mars.
Ghosts of Mars. John Carpenter's Ghosts of Mars. I had to show, as soon as I got here, he made a joke about how this was like Ghosts of Mars, and I just had to show him the part in my printout where I just wrote right next to the quote, "Lol, Ghosts of Mars."
It's written all over it. I mean, there's a lot of elements there that are lifted, I would say, pretty much wholesale.
Absolutely. No, you have a human contingency coming to colonize Mars, and and here's the thing, like, there are multiple allusions to pollens, bacteria, and algae in the story. Or not multiple, there's two of them. And they both come from humans. So I don't think that it's necessarily true that it is like that they are being like possessed by dead Martians, or if the land is just converting them into Martians. But that entire thing where there is a pollen dust that you breathe and are possessed by a Martian, that is the plot of Ghosts of Mars.
That's right. I mean, the short story doesn't need to explain what it really is because you still end up at the same result. But Ghosts of Mars makes that explicit.
It does.
They're saying, this is the horror. This is what you need to do.
And they actually make it a horror. Like, there's, as much as I would love to, like, put praise Ghosts of Mars for being, like, anti-colonialist in its way, where it's like, yeah, fuck off. Stop taking other people's planet. That movie comes out very squarely on the side of, like, fuck the Martian ghosts, this is our planet now. Ice Cube and Natasha Hemstridge, swear to God they're in the movie, it's amazing, go watch it. The girl from Species and that guy from NWA just straight murk all of these fucking Martians that are possessing people, and, like, we're cool with it. Like, we want them to do it because they're, like, our heroes. If someone tried to pull a gun on the Martians in this story, I would not feel good about that. Like, that would be horrible. And that's one of the things that I think is interesting is if it is like an alien invasion, if this is sort of like the aliens, like the Martians that were here, like possess the bodies of people now and make themselves live again, essentially. I think that the way that it happens here is like so gentle and symbiotic as to be like necessary for humans to live on Mars.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a case of symbiosis versus unwanted violation.
Yeah,
I would say would be the example. It's definitely a different kind of horror, and I mean it's almost hard to categorize Dark They Were as horror just because we have some imagery of ghosts and. If you really break it down, though, it's just a group of people who don't want to be Martians.
Exactly.
And they realize that they were Martians all along.
And there's no, like, the archaeologist or whatever never brings up, like, oh, Martians used to do this. No, the only people who bring up this idea of them being tainted by a contagion are our unreliable narrator and the next human to come upon the planet and decides the best thing to do is start renaming shit.
Exactly. And it doesn't really matter in this story what was compelling them to do it. The journey was much more important in that particular situation because it's a short story, and the difference being for Ghosts of Mars, you kind of need the John Carpenter. These are the good guys and these are the bad guys. These are who should win and these are who shouldn't win. And I think in Dark They Were, everybody wins for the most part.
Yeah. No, it seems like an absolutely beautiful, just a wonderful story where, like, no one gets hurt.
Yes.
Which is kind of rare for science fiction sometimes.
It's very rare. This has a very low body count. Not a machete in sight or a space marine. Neither one.
No, exactly. And it's like, I feel like it's, like, this story and the one we're going to read after this, I feel like I would describe them as being aggressively gentle. Just like, they're just so like, oh, I just wanted to lay some knowledge on you about life, but like whatever. Like, it's just, here's a lesson about the nature of man and what we need to do to survive, but like in just the most soft way you could possibly do it.
Yeah,
no resentment, just
acceptance. Yeah, exactly. It's both of these share that in common. I think that the horror is maybe inherent. You have to see it based on how you react to the morals at play, and that's really where it comes from. Is whether it's how you felt at the beginning and where you were at the end of the story. Exactly. So, do we have any other recommendations we can make off of Dark Day War and Golden Knight? I'm going to give a soft recommend to Mission to Mars for almost all of the same reasons as what we just gave for Ghosts of Mars, except it's not by John Carpenter, and it's not ghosts. It's something that's not ghosts. It's more computers and stuff. So yeah, soft. Tom Sizemore's great in it. Yes! Tom Sizemore is really good, and there's a lot of great holograms in that movie. Hologram technology and holograms. Yeah, soft recommend. Maybe, like a Hangover movie. Although Ghosts of Mars is also very good for that, too. Yeah. Do you have anything else you could think of for that? Not particularly. I mean, I feel like I had something when we were talking earlier. There's body transformation stuff that they could go to. There's. Oh no, I'm sorry. I do have one. No, in fact, it sort of goes along for with the film recommendations where it's like this story, but darker. Right. I would have to say H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow over Innsmouth. Oh yeah, definitely. I would recommend on that one. It's a very similar type of body horror where like there are people in it who are like kind of alien and they change and. Honestly, I feel like that story actually, it's dark and it's violent and it's full of a lot of like shocks, but I feel like, at least to me, it ends on a similar note. It does. Like, I'm very much in favor of what happens in the end of that story, and I know a lot of people aren't. Like, it scares them, but I think it's cool. So I would say, yes, Mission to Mars, Ghosts of Mars, and The Shadow over Innsmouth. Check that shit out. The music you hear is Robert Johnson's Dark Was the Night and Cold Was the Ground, which, as we speak, is hurtling through space on a golden record attached to the Voyager probe. So what you hear may be one of the first human tracks sampled by extraterrestrial life. Look out for our next episode, dropping soon, where Luskin and I will take a look at Ursula Le Guin's The Ones Who Walked Away from Omelas and Robert Heinlein's All You Zombies. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on iTunes. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. I'm at twitter.com/Bryce, BRYCE_Skidmore, SKIDMORE. And don't forget to check out our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope to have you back soon.